Thanks, John, and thanks to the IQC for inviting me here. So I'm going to start with an email. Now, I've anonymized the name, and I just took a stock photo of a young sciencey looking person on the internet. But the actual content of the email is one that I've received, and it goes, "Dear Dr. Ferry, I am also a scientist and an aspiring author. You've written dozens of children's books, have 4 kids, and an active academic career. So what is your secret?" Now, before preparing for this talk, I had never really thought about it, but I guess it does look like I do a lot of work. But a secret is not something that I've ever thought I had. And I thought by answering this question, I would only sound like an infomercial. So I just said that I didn't have a secret. Now, since publishing the books, I've been really lucky to be able to travel all around the world talking about quantum physics, including giving lectures to students, talking to business leaders and entrepreneurs, talking to science enthusiasts, students, teachers, journalists, and even parents and their toddlers. And I've received more questions about quantum physics, my personal life, and my teaching philosophy for infants than I thought were even possible. But in trying to answer honestly to all of these questions, something started to coalesce. Now, there's this old saying, I tried to look up who is attributed to, but I couldn't find it. But it goes, if you don't know where you came from, you can't know where you're going. And I thought, well, maybe there's some truth to that. Perhaps I have been too busy building an academic career and a marriage and a family that I never really took the time to reflect. And I need to stop just looking forward all the time about what the next step is in terms of publishing journal articles or what the kids are going to be doing next year in school, that I needed to really look back and think about critically how it was that I worked and lived. So I strained my terrible memory, and I bothered my mom, but probably not, because I don't call her enough anyway. Sorry, Mom. And I got some old home videos from my dad, and I set to it. And what I found was a common thread that I wanted to tell you guys about. But I'll start the story a little bit earlier with my grandfather. So my grandfather, he served briefly as a radio operator in World War II. And after that, he remained in radio his entire life, dabbling in all areas, including advertising and hosting. And then he lived out his retirement, perfecting his personal experience with any device that would produce sound. This fascination led to my father being a tinkerer of electronics as well. I remember our living room just being filled with ever-evolving handcrafted sound systems. The house was full of electronics, but not modern electronics, like our house is full of connected devices. These were full of exposed wires and DIY gadgets. And these were my father's toys. But my father wasn't a licensed electrician, and I don't think he was formally trained in anything. But that didn't stop him from being what they used to call a jack of all trades. Now, for the young people in the audience, if he had a big beard and a tattooed arm, you'd call him a maker. But the point is that he built stuff using anything that was available. And you could see from the clip that safety wasn't necessarily always a top priority. So I saw firsthand what it was to play with things that weren't packaged and marketed as toys, to play with things in new ways that others had not thought of. My brother and I, we joined my dad in the shop, which was the garage, wiring, cutting, hammering, painting. And I even earned a few permanent scars from, I think, that reciprocal saw right there. I can still see it. It's almost faded away. Right, but then there was a shift. Consumer electronics started to get cheaper. DIY gadgets were replaced with electronic chips covered in plastic. In the late 80s, personal computers became affordable for middle-class income families. I had access to Ataris, Commodores, Nintendos, Segas, and eventually personal computers and the internet. What this shift entailed was something entirely new. No longer did I play with the physical things, the hardware. I played with software. And with a twin brother, I think we both had to become rather robust users, as you could see. So I was an early adopter of many new gadgets, and that included gadgets with software. I wouldn't say I came of age with the personal computer. That's a bit too early. That's a generation before me, Gen X. So those were my friends' older siblings. They needed to learn to code to use computing devices. I came of age with graphical user interfaces, not lines of code. I'm talking about the kinds of software that we all know and love. Right? Windows, Photoshop, Office, QuickBooks, web browsers, and all of the apps on your smartphones. And over the years, I've played with software the same way that I watched my dad play with his toys and tools. This is the first home video on those recordings that he gave me. And you can see that rather for its intended use, probably like videotaping your kids, he just plays with it. And within 60 seconds, he's using it in a way that the designers probably never thought about. I have inherited this behavior. I open a toy or gadget or software program and immediately and uncontrollably start testing it and trying to figure out how it works without the instructions. And more often than not, I can get it working within a few seconds, and occasionally I find some new and interesting use for it. The entirety of my life has been a user, tester, tinkerer, and eventually builder of software. There's an apt name for this type of behavior as well, a hacker, a 21st century version of the jack of all trades. Now, of course, we're all users of software today, but this hacker mentality can be difficult to understand and achieve because software today is designed to be robust against this exact behavior. Software developers and the companies they work for don't want people using their software in ways that they didn't intend. Perhaps maybe you've seen people on the bus just performing this motion over and over and over and over again, right? So we all play with software. I mean, the average gamer is actually a middle-aged person, and they're on their phone, and they're doing this, right? This isn't the kind of play that I'm thinking about. I'm talking about play where you have unlimited freedom to explore your curiosity with the software. I think probably the single waking activity I've done most in my life is play with software. And this is my secret. My dad is a jack of all trades, and I am a jack of all software, a hacker. To make this a little more concrete, I want to give you a few snapshots over the many years of how I've used software to achieve some curious, unique, or maybe interesting things. So the home videos stopped before high school, so that's where I'm going to pick up. The internet was not really a big thing in suburban areas of Canada until around the late 90s. Of course, when the first affordable option presented itself, my dad was an early adopter. This sound here is burned into my mind. Okay, that's enough of that. So my high school, of course, had internet access in the library, but not many people used it. How the internet was used back then was like this. You knew a web page, and you wanted someone else to know that web page, so you would write down the web address, and then they would go to their web browser and type in the web address, and then they would visit the web page. Right? There was no search engines. If you didn't know the web address, then you would never find it. But then one thing came along. I don't know if anyone remembers web crawler. This was a pre-Google search engine. And this is an archived screenshot from 1996. And by the way, if you thought that fake news and conspiracy theories were only a recent problem, just look at the example of what you should search for the first time on the internet. Alien abduction, UFO Roswell. Anyway, web crawler. So it gave terrible search results. I mean, it was one of the first search engines after all. We take for granted today the amount of technology that goes into the seemingly simple task of just finding a web page. I mean, if you think about it, there's 30 trillion web pages, and you get a result within a fraction of a second. But back then, you had to be a master of the web search. You had to be a search engine hacker. Just look at the example, right? Why would you have to put quotes on alien abduction but not on UFO Roswell? Right? So getting good search results required what a little bit later but quickly went away was known as Google Foo. But now you don't need that, right? You just start typing the first letter of a word and Google knows what you wanted before you even really finished your thought. So back then, I was one of the few people that actually used web search in my high school subjects. As a teenager, of course, I used my unique web search skills for other things that made me kind of popular, but I don't have a slide for that. I used a map once to drive to one of the Carolinas. It was awful. The map, not the Carolinas. So most of my driving has been local, and for local driving, I don't think I ever used a map, like a real paper map. I got my driver's license when the dot-com boom was happening, and I used this old website, maybe you're familiar with it, MapQuest. And it looks just like any mapping software today, except it gave you really terrible directions. You could ask it for directions, and it would get you from A to B, but that's not what you want. You want the shortest route, or a route that avoids traffic, or one that takes a new street, or an old alleyway that was never on the map. Of course, you could manually put your own route in, and this is how you have to use Google today for walking directions, because it doesn't know, say, for example, on campus, all of those footpaths that have been carved out for the last 60 years by students, which is the route you want to take. So what I do is I pan around the map, you zoom in and you zoom out, and you visualize your directions and you plot your own route. So I don't think that I necessarily ever had or do have an innate sense of direction. But through practice, I think I've developed a fairly good sense of direction. And it's by doing this, using this software, that I developed it. Without use of software, I would not have the sense of direction that I have today. So for example, we're sitting here at the IQC, right? And I have looked at enough times on Google or other mapping software. I don't mean for this to be an advertisement. I keep mentioning it, but I don't mean for it to be an advertisement for Google. I just have an Android phone. So there's just this picture of Waterloo is in my mind. And it's not just Waterloo. It's all of the details and the big picture. So I'm facing east. You're facing west. We're surrounded by Ring Road, and if you pinch and zoom out, you see Waterloo. And then you find out that Waterloo's not really laid out north, south, east, west. It's more kind of northeast to southwest, right? And if you pinch more, you start to see all of southwestern Ontario, which is really northeast to southwest. And I found it really interesting that John said that Chatham was south of here, because most people would say it's west of here. But if you look at the map, it's really almost due southwest. And that sort of experience and ability that I have, I only gained by access to the ability to really play unconstrained with software. Of course, we're losing this practice. Now, if I wanted to go back to Chatham, I would just say, OK, Google, navigate to Chatham, right? So that's OK.
Actually, there's no address for Colin Turner.
Colin Turner. Does anyone know Colin Turner? He's not in Chatham. Today, I'm using software in different ways that are giving me more experiences to the point where I'm actually creating my own software. In my job as a university professor, I create software to answer scientific questions. So the software that I've created above answers a scientific question whose answer is depicted below. And then I use other software to program and create an academic journal. So that computer code creates an academic journal article that looks like that. And then I yet use more software to create presentations to communicate those results to other scientists. So all of that, which was one research project, contains many different pieces of software, some of which I had to create. When I'm not in the office, I have a little hobby. Unsurprisingly, it makes use of software. I write and illustrate children's books. And I've used different software to write, illustrate, and format the books. And being able to do all of this allowed me to self-publish the books using completely automated online tools. The software you see being used here is called Inkscape. It's free and open source. But I doubt that the designers had this use in mind when they created it. So this software allows me to appear like an artist, but I'm really just manipulating shapes and vectors. Of course, that picture right there is the grumpy old professor, and he appears in Goodnight Lab, which was not a self-published book, but my first published picture book. And the publisher is Sourcebooks in Chicago, and I'm quite proud to say that I actually got a publishing house to change, at least when interacting with me, the design software that they use. And they now use Inkscape as well, at least when they have to answer my emails. And speaking of publishing, I actually used translation software to negotiate my first international book contract. And I used translation software in writing new books directly for the Chinese market. So my reply is, dear anonymous fellow aspiring author, I do have an answer. Of course, I don't manage alone. I have an amazing partner. But I also have software. And without the efficient use of software and the ability to play with it, Quantum Physics for Babies, my first book, would not exist. In fact, all of the other books, including the one I showed you making, would not exist. And my entire academic career probably wouldn't exist either. So my upbringing was ideal for someone to make efficient use of evolving technology. But these successes are a product of the unique environment, culture, and opportunities that I was exposed to. Of course, I have my parents to thank for that, and maybe you see me looking at them. They're right there, so thank you. You can applaud. Yeah. More. They're getting embarrassed. More. Yeah. Where was I? But because of the uniqueness of opportunities, success stories are, I think, pretty useless for generating advice. They cannot be repeated, so bummer. But it is a big bummer because now I am a parent, as you can see from this photo, and I cannot repeat what my parents did in detail, but I can in spirit. So I can give my children experiences and opportunities to play with new tools and technology. But that is not enough. I think the real lesson from my childhood story is that children will be attracted to the ideas, mannerisms, and activities that their parents or teachers or peers show with genuine interest. And I'm not really worried about a lack of interest in science and technology from my children, since they see my constant enthusiasm for it. But I want to give you a kind of cute example of the theme that I'm trying to convey here. So lately, the thing that my children see me doing the most and most interested in is not necessarily science, but writing and illustrating books, which happen to be about science. So I was quite amused, but I guess in hindsight, not all that surprised, that they started showing interest in making their own books. They see my enthusiasm for it, and the tools are, of course, readily available. And so very often, they show up in the morning at breakfast with a new book they've made. Now, I'm a little bit worried that I'm not demonstrating the practice of science enough, because after my 4-year-old watched me give a presentation at the World Science Festival in Brisbane in February, he said to me, "Daddy, when you grow up, maybe you can stop talking about science and actually do science." If you know me for long, maybe you won't think the apple's fallen too far off the tree. Right, so what about you? Do you think you've inherited the interests and curiosities of your parents? If you have children, are they inheriting yours? What opportunities and experiences are you affording them? And what do you show them with genuine interest and enthusiasm? So I want to tell you something else that I'm enthusiastic about, and that my children just might be uniquely placed to take advantage of, if they so wish. Now, this probably isn't the first time you've heard this being in Waterloo, but welcome to the quantum realm. So I won't really tell you too much about quantum physics, because I'm hoping that you've heard it many times, and I've already spent too much time talking about myself. But I'll just briefly mention that quantum technology is, in fact, the most successful and accurate scientific theory we've ever had, which leads for it to be the basis of basically all modern technology. And so you can see some examples here. You have how you got here today, the GPS, right? In order for GPS to work, requires precise timing. That's only given to us by atomic clocks, and it has the word atom right in it. So obviously requires some knowledge of quantum physics. On the bottom right, we have an image of a brain. That's not looking at the brain that you normally think of. That's looking at nuclear spins. So that's a MRI, and in order to get any sort of medical scans at a hospital, required understanding of quantum physics. We have compact discs or DVDs, which use lasers to make and read the information from. And of course, on the bottom left, we have fiber optic cables, which sends pulses of light that use states of light that are only understood through quantum physics. And that's, of course, necessary because those cables are spread out all through the world and under the ocean, connecting us all together. And what are they connecting? Well, they're connecting the billions upon billions of transistors in all of our computers. And in order to make all of those transistors and put them in computers, required knowledge of semiconductor physics, which is only understood through an understanding of quantum physics. But all of this is what we call quantum technology 1.0. Okay, it's based on our understanding of quantum physics when we have these billions of atoms, macroscopic things that you can see, kind of all acting together. Today, we can control individual atoms. On the left, you see an ion trap from NIST that's holding one or more individual atoms. On the right is a manufactured atom. In fact, 4, well, in each of the panels, 4 artificial atoms. So this future quantum technology and future, what it's going to enable is future quantum computers. These will solve existing unsolvable problems and probably solve other problems that we haven't even thought about. And of course, quantum is just one of many emerging technologies. But I want to be quick to say that, I'm not suggesting that everyone should become a quantum technologist or a technologist at all, but the opportunity should be available. And with that opportunity might come something very interesting and important. So I want you to think about a person in technology. Now, depending on how old you are and what social media platforms you use, you'll have a different answer. But I see many people in the audience that I believe would probably answer this guy, Bill Gates. So Bill Gates also has a success story, and it has similar roots to the one that I just told you. The endings are quite different, especially the endings of the zeros on our bank account statements. But the point is that Gates had a very unique opportunity to access and play with early computers. And probably the path that led to his first success was mostly unintentional, much like my own. So he has those moments of play with computers to thank for his zeros, which are good because there's a number in front of them. So my claim is that 20 years from now, there'll be a quantum technology equivalent of Bill Gates, a future leader who's probably only 8 years old today. And that child will have access and opportunity to understand and play with new quantum technology and will come of age with the next quantum technology revolution. Perhaps that person will be her. Perhaps not. But it definitely will not if she's not given authentic exposure and space to play with it. So that's it. That's my secret. I'm slightly confident that I dodged my fear of becoming an infomercial because I really didn't give you a secret recipe, and I didn't have one weird trick that makes life coaches angry or anything like that. So these weren't steps to become a leader in quantum technology or physics or science more generally. The road to success is not paved with neat stones laid out in front of you. In fact, I think road is probably a terrible analogy for achieving success. I think success is not really a destination which you should be aiming for. It's something that you continually build up underneath you. And what I'm trying to say is that it's built up by spreading just opportunities kind of randomly around you that you can play with. Now, there's many adults in the audience, so we're free, of course, to create that variety for ourselves. And you should, because people are watching and learning from you. And they need examples of what it looks like to play, tinker, and most importantly, struggle with big ideas. Thank you. I guess I'll take questions. Yeah. Yeah, so if you look at Bill Gates' story, or at least the way it's told, it's like most stories, it's probably changed from the reality. But he had a very unique opportunity to play with computers that existed in labs where you had to be there with punch cards, right? Now that opportunity was afforded to him because of the social status that his parents had. Today it's much different, right? That picture that you saw of the little girl playing with an actual quantum computer is free for anyone to use on the internet. Right? So today I think the opportunity is open to anyone with internet access because the community is really driven by this open science movement, which I think is great. So I think the opportunity today is open to far more people than in the past with the computer technology revolution.
Can you just say what the software is there?
Oh, yeah, so this is the IBM Quantum Experience. So a lot of the people that develop that are IQC alumni, and they often come back and teach students and sometimes the public, I think. If you Google, or your favorite search engine, IBM Quantum Experience, then you can go and there's a graphical way to actually play with a real quantum computer. Yeah. And there's many other tools as well.
Are you aware of what is the current status of an entrepreneurial spirit in the quantum technologies? I mean, how big is the fight there? Because I remember reading Bill Gates' biography. During his time, it was a very strong fight between different ideas, how the personal computer should look and what operating system will win and things like that. So are we now in that state, or we still are at the beginning? We're not yet at that boiling point where there are lots of ideas and a lot of fight to find the winning solution.
Well, I won't say that there isn't a lot of fights, but happily those fights tend to be academic, because even there is now a growing entrepreneurial attitude towards quantum computing. There are many startups, but most of them are started by academics who have sort of a different mentality about how they share and use the research that exists. So I think in the days of the early computers, we had people that were hobbyists and really kind of building things. And there it makes a lot more sense to feel like you might have ownership of something and want to sell something because it's a real thing that you transfer to someone else. Whereas because it's coming from academia, and a lot of these startups are about software right from the get-go, these ideas are just floating around for everyone to use. So I think the competition is there, but it's a lot different than what we saw with early computers.
Do you think quantum computing is developing slower than how fast classical computing has been developing, or?
Yeah, I guess it really depends on your definition of develop. I think it's really hard to see a lot of the development that happens in computers. We just expect that the next iteration of the iPhone is going to be faster than the last, without really understanding that a lot of technology goes into each iteration. Screen sizes and clock speeds and memories of computers, they seem to go at this steady pace, right? But that's just what we see as consumers. The technology behind it is changing rapidly. With quantum computers, I think it's really hard to say. I mean, it's really too soon. And there's, of course, the famous quote from the late 40s, I think, from the president at the time, or CEO of IBM, who said, "I don't think there will be a market in the world for more than 5 computers." So I think it would be very unwise this early to make a prediction about the future of quantum computers, because you might end up looking like him.
You spoke about the advantages of playing with software from very early age. In the media and in education system where I work, there is a lot of talk and there is a lot of pushback against screen time, right? And there is a lot of talk about educating parents on how to protect kids essentially from screen time.
Right.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a hard problem. I think not all screen time is equivalent. When I started playing video games, which I've played far too many hours of in my life, it was, Super Mario. You saw the video where I made it about 10 steps and died, and I just kept trying over and over, finding new ways. I think that game probably was just designed by someone having fun. Games that kids play today are designed by psychologists where what they're trying to optimize is dopamine hits, right? So the kinds of screen time that I experienced are a lot different than the screen time that children experience today. I think as a parent myself, we don't spend a lot of time in front of the screens. And that time is spent, I think, trying to do things constructive. So I think really the last thing you want to do is put a YouTube video on for your kid and let them decide what's next. Because what's next eventually ends up being watching kids open surprise eggs for 24 hours a day. So I think if you think of a screen as just something for the child to do because you want some of your own free time, or maybe you need that free time to do something, so it's just a distraction, then it can get quite dangerous. But I think there are really valuable tools that kids can use when they're in front of a screen, including this one. But I'm there. When they're in front of a screen, I'm there.
I have one more question. You have a slide with the quantum leap, and you have a image. That image is quantum related, or?
This one?
No, before.
Oh, this?
Yeah.
Oh, this is what happens when you go to a website that offers free images and you type quantum. That has probably nothing to do with quantum physics. But of course, we can't see atoms with our eyes. Actually, that's not true. I have seen an atom in Innsbruck, an individual atom. But it was just a kind of a fuzzy little blue glowing thing. So any picture of quantum is an artist's interpretation. And I think this one took a lot of artistic licensing to create.
Hi, my name is Adrian, and I'm investing in the quantum technology right now. And so currently, most of the qubits or of the qubits is noisy or qubits. But do you see a bottleneck in that for that approach? And what do you think about the topological quantum computing?
Okay, so your first question was about current qubits and the fact that they're noisy. Yeah, so in an eventual future quantum computer, there will always be noise. But the idea is that you would have enough qubits so that you could use many qubits to create a logical qubit. And at each time you kind of iterate this process of taking many to one, you can effectively reduce the noise. So the only reason that we're not doing that now is just because we don't have enough qubits and the amount of noise isn't low enough. In principle, there's no bottleneck. It's just a limitation of current technology. There's nothing in the theory, which has been tested better than any other theory that we have, that suggests at some point, we can't build a bigger thing with more qubits. Topological qubits is a proposal. To my knowledge, one hasn't been demonstrated, but the physics behind it is well understood, and those experiments are constantly producing more and more impressive results. So again, there's no principle by which that technology won't work. And again, I don't think anyone's qualified to say which technology will be the most successful. It's too early to tell.
So very basic question. How do you define quantum and what's a qubit?
Yeah, some people were cheating with their questions. Quantum, in my view, is a mathematical framework that works well at describing systems which are very well isolated from any environment. So if you think of an atom, it's really, really small, and it's mostly space. In fact, we are mostly space. So an atom is pretty well isolated because the nearest thing is another atom that's really far away. A quantum computer will be a big thing that we need to isolate from its environment. And both of these things are just really well described by this mathematical framework that's called quantum theory. And a qubit is the simplest quantum system, and we can think of it as a building block for larger quantum things, including a piece of technology like a quantum computer.